Okay. That scenario leaves the core structure as though, I mean, they basically pretended the core structure wasn't there. Like there was just a hollow tube up the center, and that's the way they described it.
Right. I think John Farmer said that during the 9/11 Commission, that it was just hollow tubing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that hollow tubing supposedly was 47 very massive columns that went up the center and very heavily cross-braced. It was like a building within a building, and it could have stood totally on its own. And so if you basically had the floor pancaking, is like records falling on a spindle, you would have still have had that core standing after it's all over. That's the spire in the North Tower that's standing. Some of the core columns actually did survive the original fall of the building. And so that's a few of the core columns that were left there. And the main core columns had been eliminated. All of that whole central structure would have been left. So NIST rejected the pancaking theory because they recognized that it was unsupportable. Mm-hmm. And so they went to the opposite kind of thing. They needed to have something that would crush the core columns, because the core column, getting rid of those core columns had to have been what was going on. And so they came up with this whole idea that the top section acted like a pile driver to crush the core columns, okay? So my paper on the North Tower addresses that, and Tony Zambodi and Graham McQueen, their analysis is very similar to mine. They're sort of like two sides of the same coin. But that analysis, the whole thing is that the small upper section of the building could not possibly have crushed the lower undamaged core columns. Mm-hmm. And the very simplistic reasoning is, it's like the idea, could you take a Volkswagen that has a head-on collision with a big semi and crush the semi with your Volkswagen? And no. If this top section of the building, which is only a dozen floors or so, comes down on the undamaged structure below it, the force of impact is going to demolish both of them at a more or less symmetric kind of a rate, and the top section would be demolished ahead of time, and then might knock out a dozen floors below it, but that's about it, and so forth. So that's the simplistic way. The objective evidence there is, if you take the acceleration of that chunk coming down, it accelerates downward the whole time through the supposed impact. And the only way you can have a downward, listen folks here, the only way you can get a downward acceleration is if the net force is downward. The only way the net force can be downward is if the downward pull of gravity, namely the weight of the top section, is greater than the resistive force. And the resistive force works both ways. So it works out that the resistive force was only about 36% of the weight of the top section. Therefore, any force available to crush the building was only 36% of the weight of that little top chunk. And the building was designed to hold 100% of the weight of that top chunk. So no way was there enough force to do the damage. And that's my argument. That was Tony Zambodi's argument.
Right, like I know I've asked you before a million ways till Sunday, as a professional, as an expert in this area. There's just no way that the two towers or World Trade Center 7 could have came down the way they did naturally.
Right.
And you've told me unequivocally, no, it's just not possible.
That's right. They did not come down naturally. The evidence is overwhelming that they did not come down naturally. Mm-hmm. And any arguing that I've heard is just running around in circles, focusing on one tiny detail and ignoring everything else and so forth. And the bottom line is there's overwhelming evidence. Even if you don't get into the chemical stuff of looking for the thermite and all the rest, just the mechanics of the collapse is enough to show that it was being demolished. Well, by the way, I want to say one more thing. I forgot to mention the South Tower. The South Tower, the supposed hammer that came down to crush the building, it fell off. I mean, it tipped over to the side. So what's crushing the building then? You see demolition waves running down the rest of the building, despite the fact that the top section is no longer aligned on top of it to push down. It's leaning way over the side. it falls into the debris cloud, and then there's some ambiguity on whether it sort of tumbles within the building or whether it falls off to the side. If you notice, the whole debris is asymmetric in the direction of its collapse, so I think a substantial chunk of that top section actually fell off. There's a question of, did it continue to rotate and so forth. So it's a fairly complicated interaction, and a lot of it was obscured. But essentially, it did not stay aligned with all of those columns. How's it going to crush the columns?
Right, like that would have to be
how do you eliminate the core columns? And this top section that's supposedly doing the eliminating of the core columns falls either off or at least out of alignment. How is the core structure of the building being demolished?
Right, like, yeah, there's just nothing there to be pile driving it with or whatever.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, anybody that looks at the videos, even like, using my dad for an example, he thinks George Bush is a great guy. He loves him. He thinks he's, one of those cowboy kind of, good old boys. Mm-hmm. But even when he's seen the videos, he says, well, yeah, it sure does look weird. And especially with Building 7, it's like, really? That's like, he had the same kind of reaction almost as Danny Joenko. He's like, that happened on 9/11? Like, are you sure about that? How do you know? I'm like, seriously, I'm telling you, it happened on 9/11.
Yeah.
But,
well, the deal is, people's intuitions are correct. And so basically what my measurements are doing is it's just validating your obvious intuition that that's what you see happening.
Right, giving you the fact.
The task that NIST has is to try to tell people, oh, it looks that way, but trust us, it's something totally different going on. And the whole thing is trying to do a con job based on an appeal to authority, that, hey, we're the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Let's take a hike, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's effective with even scientific community, because NIST has a very strong, very positive reputation, even within the scientific community.
And then they got
they got good scientists there. They do good stuff. Mm-hmm. But in this case, you have Bush science. You have the science being controlled by a political agenda.
Right.
And so people who are inclined to just do a seat of the pants assessment, they say, oh, conspiracy theories, right? Well, that's sort of you have a mental condition if you're a conspiracy theorist. I've had people tell me that, hey, anyway.
Well, anytime it's, a conspiracy means more than one is doing a nefarious
thing. It has nothing to do with whether it's a conspiracy. It's just a way of demeaning your position. The whole conspiracy thing might have been appropriate in terms of the Kennedy assassination, because there was an argument was there a lone gunman or was it a conspiracy? But here, it's not that at all. It's just they've done so much bad-mouthing of critique of the Kennedy assassination,
right, that
they're saying, well, it's a bunch of these deranged people that just won't let go. They just keep on keeping on long, like how long has it been since Kennedy was assassinated? And people are still arguing where the shooters were on the grassy knoll and all this kind of thing.
Right.
As though it's just sort of a fool's errand or sort of a Don Quixote kind of a thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're just trying to associate critique of the NIST reports and so forth with that kind of a situation.
Well, I have noticed lately there's been a difference of opinions about what the prominent issues should be, whether it be demolitions or, foreknowledge or air defense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The way I see it is, well, one thing I'm trying to understand is, as I've said this before, was a lot of the first responders and a lot of people, when you try and start to tell them about the buildings, the destruction of the buildings or World Trade Center 7, like, for some reason, a lot of these people have it in their heads that they fell naturally. I don't know why. I don't know. I'm thinking they must have been told something, and they're just believing what they were told.
Well, they don't have any basis for making an analysis. I mean, I didn't have any basis until I actually started doing some measurements and actually looking at it seriously. I mean, I was going along with it till 2006 or so. So it's not like it's just obvious to anybody. some of those first responders heard explosions, and so the idea that there were secondary explosions, you have to say, what's that all about? If all of it was happening was we didn't intercept the hijackers, then I can understand where you could have planes crashing into the buildings and then having secondary effects from the crashes. But what about all these secondary explosions people are hearing and all the other evidence that turned up? So, yes, I agree. I mean, I've listened to some of this debate on what is the most strategically wise approach to pushing the case for a new investigation of 9/11. So there's some people out there that are saying, oh, this whole controlled demolition thing is a dead end. Well, that's baloney. It's not a dead end. We have solid proof of demolition. It's the most solid evidence we have. And so the idea that we should take what we've achieved through all this evidence and simply brush it aside is ludicrous. We should not give up on that. Now, I agree that there's other things going on at other levels. So, yeah, there was this insider trading. Yeah, there was something to do with hijackers. There was something to do with the plane and the foreknowledge and all the rest. So then you have to account for all of that, and how do you integrate all that other stuff in? But you can't lose sight of the fact that in addition to all that other stuff that was going on, somebody was also planting explosives in that building. And so it's not just a matter of we got caught off guard and then you say, oh, how convenient, let's just let it happen. So the idea of a passive role of letting it happen is not adequate.
But the destruction of the towers, that shows a premeditated, effort to do this. It wasn't just, let these hijackers go and do it.
Yeah.
There was advanced placement of something. I'm not sure actually what your opinion is, but we know for a fact that the towers and number 7 could not have came down naturally. That's factual.
Mm-hmm.
Where we get into opinion how.
That's the end product of all the analysis that we've done. Okay.
Right.
Now, the how is explosives were used. And the other part of the how is we've identified explosives. And the thermite studies are valid. And so people try to poo-poo that and, say that there's some kind of doubt about that. And that's just lame. The nanothermite, if you read the paper, it is not that hard to read. Mm-hmm. The actual original paper, if you can read Scientific American, which is basically a layman's science magazine, it's clear enough that if you could read a scientific article like that, you could read the nanothermite paper itself. By the way, have you read it?
Myself, no.
Yeah. You need to read it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You absolutely need to read it. If you're going to talk about it, you need to actually read it. And it's not that bad as far as the technical level of it.
Right.
There are charts and graphs and things like that, but there's a lot of words as well, and you can go through. Jim Hoffman has a watered-down layman's approach to it that sort of goes through and paraphrases things so that it even extracts the meaning even better. So you can start with that, but I think you could actually, the actual paper itself is so clearly written. It's masterfully done, and you need to read it. I have a link on my website that goes there. It's, if you go to 911speakout.org, go to the links tab, and one of the links there is to that paper. And
okay, what I'll do is I'll put up all these links with the show.
Put up the links, but actually go and read it yourself. It's not. It's a bunch of pages, but it's not that long. I can't remember. It's about 20 pages or something. I'm just guessing. It's something on that order. However, it's readable, it's understandable, it's clear, and it'll answer a lot of questions. And so the whole idea that was somehow shoddy work or flimsy or unsupported or whatever is just totally bogus. It's a very clear paper that explains a very clear analysis of this prospect. They're trying to say, well, the official thing now, I guess, is, chain of custody. They can't establish chain of custody.
Right, that's an excuse Gene Corley used, was he's like, you'd never be able to prove chain of custody, so your samples wouldn't really mean anything. Yeah.
Well, that's just cop-out.
Right.
If you go through and read what they did, in any kind of jury, the chain of custody is clear.